All right, good morning, and thank you for attending this special media briefing on the statewide budget with a special look at how Washington's tech and startup companies will be impacted. My name is Jillian Hens. I'm the Director of Communications at the Seattle Metro Chamber, and I'll be moderating today's briefing. Our presenters today will take turns sharing their perspectives. Sit tight and take notes. We will allow our presenters to get through their sections first and then answer your questions at the end. After the presentation, each of you can ask one question and one follow-up. We'll allow for more questions if we have time. Following the questions for our presenters, Seattle Metro Chamber President and CEO Rachel Smith will treat you to a brief early preview from our latest installment of the Index, our semi-annual voter research, with data collected just last week that has direct ties to the state budget decisions being made in Olympia today. Rachel and the additional association executives on this call will be available for Q&A following that brief data presentation. Additional questions can be sent to my email address, and I will put that in the chat now. Okay, now that we're all set up, I would like to introduce you to Steve Mullen, President at Washington Roundtable.
Thanks, Jillian. Welcome and thank you all for attending this briefing this morning to hear from the Association of Washington Business, the Bellevue Chamber of Commerce, the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, and the Washington Roundtable. Today, we will be exploring the views of our technology and startup businesses regarding taxes and the economy as state lawmakers, as you're all well aware, consider how to address the state's projected budget shortfall. It's really been great for us as a business community to work together in an unprecedented coordination on this issue. Really want to extend my thanks to our partners at the Chamber, AWB, and the Bellevue Chamber and Seattle Chamber. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Seattle Chamber CEO and President, Rachel Smith.
Thank you so much, Steve. So I'm just going to kind of jump right in and then we'll hand it over to our main presenters. And then as Jillian said, I'll give some index data at the end here that is hot off the presses. But I think you all know this, but just to say it again, if approved, the recent state revenue proposals that we have seen out of Olympia would result in the largest tax increase in Washington state history to essentially cover unsustainable spending growth. And that is growth that far exceeds state increases in population, inflation, and personal income. This is also happening against a backdrop of a federal government that is dismantling programs and enacting crippling tariffs, both of which are harming our economy here in Washington state, and against a backdrop of declining tax revenues here in Seattle, the state's economic engine, again, which I'll talk more about shortly. And lastly, legislators are doing this seemingly without regard to the ripple effects, the impacts on the overall economic ecosystem, and especially to new and startup businesses. The history of the Puget Sound region is synonymous with innovation. Our robust tech sector accounts for nearly 1.5 million direct and indirect jobs and represents 22% of the state economy. In fact, an astounding 9.4% of jobs in Washington are tech jobs, and they account for 22% of all of the compensation paid in the state of Washington. And we know these job creators have choices in terms of where they decide to call home, where they can be most successful, and we are encouraging state leaders to embrace making it easier to start and grow an innovation business in Washington state. Our business voices are here today to share, the real threat to innovation in Washington state and likely the loss of good-paying jobs if we raise taxes statewide to increase the spending that has been talked about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, which is Raji Subramanian, and she is the co-founder and CEO of Stealth AI Startup. Raji, thank you so much for being here with us today, and I will hand it to you to take it away.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you so much for attending this briefing. My name, as Rachel indicated, is Raji Subramanian. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I co-founded my previous startup in Seattle. And it was the obvious choice when my co-founder and I decided to start our current startup last year. There was no other city we considered. We decided to start it in Seattle. It's been our home. Again, I love the city and the state of Washington. It's been my personal home as well as my work home for the last 25 years. I moved here 25 years back. It was an interesting time to move to the Seattle area then. It was a very different Seattle. It was in the early days of making this place one of the largest tech and innovation hubs in the country and also the world. And it did not happen by accident. I saw all of the work that went into making this city and the larger area one of those hubs. It was a combination of factors. It was tech giants moving in here, attracting top talent to the area, which brought in an inflow of venture capital and created a vibrant startup ecosystem. And most importantly, though, it also had a supportive business environment which fueled its growth. But simply, I'm a technologist. It was a chain reaction. When one factor triggered others, and ultimately the entire state, all of us benefited from it. Now, a similar process can undo decades of work and start a reverse reaction and hinder our ability to solve the very problems we're trying to solve. In this case, fostering and nurturing ecosystem while at the same time balancing our budgets. This is personal to me. As an entrepreneur, each time you start a company, you leave your comfort zone and you start something new. You're driven by a sense of purpose and you also want to make a difference. You take a risk. Each time you start a company, you walk into the unknown and you take a risk. And each of the factors that built this innovation ecosystem can have an outsized effect on a startup. If it impacts a business, it can have that much more impact on a startup's ability to succeed. And taxes is one of those critical factors. As a startup, you deal with inherent uncertainty in every direction you turn. The proposed business taxes at a time of broader economic uncertainty amplifies it that much more. In some very, very tangible ways, as far as a startup is concerned, we always work with very limited capital. And if the cost of business increases, it impacts our ability to demonstrate product market fit and prove out our business models. We have a very, very short runway. It makes that much more shorter before we need to raise additional capital or achieve self-sustenance. It just reduces the odds. This in turn impacts the success rate of existing startups in the area. It will also give pause to new entrepreneurs who want to start companies here and limit access to venture capital. So there's a self-fulfilling cycle that's going to start. We're also struggling to attract and retain top talent, specifically at the time where we need AI talent. It's core to innovation, and the changes proposed will make it harder for us to compete, and specifically for startups to compete for the best talent, causing them to be able to hire fewer people in the area and having to find alternate solutions to fill their gaps. These decisions are one-way doors, and the impact is going to be harder to reverse once they're made. Fewer startups, less venture capital, and the talent drain will cost us way more time and money in the form of incentives to recover from. It took Seattle 20 plus years to be a top-rated tech center in the US. This will take Seattle certainly back in time a lot. As we say in tech, are we making the right long-term and short-term trade-offs, or will this come back to bite us? And as I look at it today, and as I look at the challenges that I as an entrepreneur face today, there's one thing that I kind of like is top of mind for me. We are in the midst of one of the most innovative innovations that I've seen in my entire life, and probably for centuries that we've seen with AI. I just feel that now is not the time. My biggest worry is that the state of Washington and Seattle will be left behind. Again, thank you for the time. I would love to hand it over to Kelly Fukai.
Thank you, Raji. Appreciate those comments. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kelly Fukai. I'm the CEO of the Washington Technology Industry Association. We're a statewide member trade association representing 1,000 companies across Washington state, like Raji's. We are really blessed here in Washington state to have an innovation ecosystem that's interconnected, and tech is the flywheel of that innovation. Washington's startup ecosystem is uniquely anchored by the presence of world-class institutions and global tech leaders. These anchor institutions provide not just jobs, but also mentorship, investment, and a fertile ground for the spin-off ventures. The talent pool that's nurtured within these established icons directly fuels the growth of thousands of smaller innovative companies like Raji's across the region. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at our Innovate State map that was recently put together, it really is a great visual representation. And actually, it's just a small scale of a larger tech universe map that we create that really highlights this flywheel of innovation that exists in Washington state. It's a symbiotic relationship, and it's hallmark to Washington State's tech ecosystem. It creates a virtuous cycle of innovation, job creation, and economic growth. And this isn't accidental. It's the result of decades of strategic and collaborative investments in a supportive ecosystem where startups get to thrive alongside these established tech giants. As Rachel just mentioned, the tech sector is crucial to Washington State's economic prosperity. We already pay an outsized share of revenues to the state. Data from our most recent economic impact report highlights, as Rachel pointed out, 1.5 million direct and indirect jobs. For every one tech job, that's 3 more jobs that are created in the state. 22% of the state's economy. 4.3 billion in taxes in 2022. We have a B&O contribution growth rate of 86% over the last 15 years. We even taxed ourselves with the advanced computing surcharge that alone raises $60 million a year to support high demand STEM degree production. Our companies pay 1.1 billion in sales and use taxes. 1.5 billion in sales taxes are paid by our tech sector employees, which is money spent in our communities and supporting local businesses. And there is so much investment that is not captured in these tax numbers. Our companies give tens of millions of dollars to support affordable housing, transportation, climate and energy, and other projects in our communities. It's so important to remember this isn't just a conversation about big tech. It's about the thousands of startups and small tech companies and that also employ thousands of tech workers across the state. They rely upon the stability of our iconic enterprise companies to provide that success. We're on the precipice of another technological revolution with the advancements of generative AI. Our most recent AI landscape report further underscores how Washington State has the potential to be a leading global leader in this burgeoning field and showcases the concentration of AI talent and research that's right here within our borders. We should be doing everything that we can to ensure that that global technology is developed here in Washington State. Now is not the time to slow down the inertia of our innovation flywheel. I know I get to talk to other state trade associations like mine across the nation, and they are hungry for what we have got. They have resources and policies poised to recruit our emerging companies and our talented workforce. And if our state targets the tech sector with billions more in taxes while in the midst of significant national economic turmoil, where many firms are already grappling with layoffs and making their own budget cuts, it would be an unmistakable signal to the market that tech is no longer welcome here in Washington State. I can't echo the comments that Raji has made. She's dealing with it day to day, and we hear it from our members on a daily basis as well. It is just getting harder and harder for them to do business here. And they keep saying to us, now is not the time to stop the flywheel of innovation that is here in Washington State. Thanks for the opportunity to share a few thoughts that we have on where things are going, and I'll pass it back to Jillian.
Thank you so much to our speakers, Raji and Kelly. Now is the time for our first Q&A section. So if you would like to ask our speakers a question, go ahead and put your name and media outlet in the chat, and I'll call on you when it's your turn. Unmute yourself, ask your question, and get your answer. Then we will also have a second Q&A section after our little index preview here. So this would be time for questions for Raji and Kelly. Okay. Oh, Jim Brunner, Seattle Times, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I'm curious, given the movement the legislature has apparently made dropping some of the taxes that at least some of the tech companies have objected to, payroll tax. At least last week, anyway, the payroll tax and the wealth tax, they appear to have taken those off the table, except in maybe some smaller version of the wealth tax. Which taxes are you specifically concerned about now that you're saying would target tech industry?
Steve, do you maybe want to take that one? Steve, do you want to take that, or Chris?
Sorry, in terms of the specific tech, thought maybe one of the tech folks would want to address.
I was going to say I'm happy to jump in too.
Yeah.
Of course, we're concerned about the B&O taxes, the sales and use expansion on services, and definitely capital gains is something that our entrepreneurs often voice concerns around. So those are ones that we're particularly watching now that the wealth and the payroll taxes have gone away. But property tax is also something that folks have brought up as a concern, particularly for those that are property owners or quite frankly, rent space, that know that those costs will ultimately be passed through to them.
Thank you, Kelly. Jim, did you have a follow-up question?
No, that's good for that one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then Joshua McNichols, I did see you raise your hand. Did you have a question or did you want to hold?
That was accidental. I apologize.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. Okay. Seeing no other questions right at this moment, I would like to invite you to stay on our call for the second part of today's presentation. The Seattle Metro Chamber's 8th installment of the index will be fully released on April 29th, so save the date to participate in our media availability with our pollster next Tuesday. Today's preview is a handful of data points from the index related to the City of Seattle's economic forecast and how the state can expect similar outcomes for tax revenue and business impacts. Rachel and the additional association executives on this call will be available for Q&A following this brief presentation. Rachel, take it away.
Thanks, Jillian. And I want to say thanks again to Raji and to Kelly. And they will be on. So if you have some more questions that come to mind as we wrap up here, you can feel free to ask those. So over the course of the legislative session, much has been said about the likely impacts of new taxes and tax increases being proposed by the legislature. But here in Seattle, we can look at the actual impacts of tax proposals that were passed over the last few years. And the story is really a cautionary tale, one that lawmakers in Olympia ought to be paying attention to. The just released City of Seattle's April economic and revenue forecast and the city's 2024 year-end revenue report shows that nearly all City of Seattle revenue sources indicate that business activity is down and it is falling. 2024 payroll expense tax collections fell short of the October forecast and are projected to be 18.5% below budget in both 2025 and 2026. Business and occupation tax revenues have dropped year over year in 2024, and projections were also adjusted downward for 2025 and 26. And due largely to reduced construction activity, sales and use tax collections were essentially flat year over year in 2024 and are also projected to fall short of expectations in this biennium. So said another way, B&O and payroll expense tax are down, sales tax is flat, and all three of these major revenue sources for the city are forecasted to come in under budget this year and next. And importantly, the 2024 numbers do not reflect actions taken by the Trump administration. They are a result of local policy decisions. And while there is likely no single driver, I was struck, by a comment made when Seattle's chief economist, who said businesses respond to incentives when speaking about a payroll expense tax proposal. And I wanted to just dive a little deeper into that for a moment. The payroll tax in Seattle is driven by three factors: how many people are employed and making above a certain threshold in Seattle, how much money they make, and what the stock market is doing. And according to the recent forecast, in 2024, the stock market was strong and wage growth, which is a measure of jobs in King County, did not change that much. The only conclusion then is that there are fewer jobs that were subject to the payroll tax in Seattle, meaning that those jobs moved elsewhere in King County. You all know that because of the headlines that you yourself have written and statements made by Seattle businesses, but now there is actual economic data to back it up. And look, Seattle voters are smart. They understand all of this. They understand what is happening and they are expressing their concern. So in our most recent installment of the ISDEX, which as Jillian said, was just in the field last week, we learned that 73% of voters agree that businesses in Seattle are closing down or leaving for nearby cities because the cost of doing business has gotten too high here. Nearly half, 48%, believe City of Seattle regulation and taxes are a primary or a major factor contributing to cost of living, with 41% believing it's a minor factor. And 55% of voters in Seattle said they think taxes in Seattle are too high for the level of services the city provides. And not only do voters understand, but I think more importantly, they're very clear-eyed in what they want to see lawmakers do to keep our local economy strong. 81%, 8 in 10 people, want to see leaders focus on protecting local jobs and small businesses in this uncertain economic environment by lowering the cost to start and run a business in Seattle. And 76% believe city leaders should be incentivizing businesses to create family wage jobs here in Seattle so that our local economy stays resilient in the face of national economic uncertainty. So let me say that again. Over 3/4 of voters in Seattle want public officials to support our local economy, businesses, and job creation. But let's rewind the tape here just for a quick minute and look at how we got to a place where Seattle, boomtown, is facing an actual decline in business tax revenue. And honestly, it's not that hard to see. Since 2019, Seattle has passed the payroll expense tax and increased it twice, passed a sweetened beverage tax, a short-term rental tax, a transportation network company tax, and passed a bunch of new laws regulating certain industries and business activities. So it is frankly pretty confounding to us that, knowing this, state lawmakers are considering levying new business taxes and policy proposals that are likely to have the exact same effect. B&O tax increases on childcare, behavioral health services, medical research and development, and wholesale groceries. New sales tax on services. Unemployment insurance for striking workers. As my friend Chris Johnson on this call often says, and I like to quote him, you can't make things more affordable by making them more expensive. And you can't make the economy stronger by making it more uncertain for businesses and placing jobs at risk. And that is especially true, as has been said a couple of times on this call, against the backdrop of what is happening at the national level. Tariffs, a plummeting stock market, longstanding government programs being slashed, and significant uncertainty for businesses. And Seattle voters are well aware of those risks too, with 90%, 9 out of 10 people in Seattle saying they are worried about national economic policies and that they will lead to a recession. And 84% say they are more concerned about their personal financial situation since President Trump took office. So our message to lawmakers is this: look in your own backyard to Seattle to see exactly what will happen if you move forward with all of these proposals. And punchline, it's not good. And voters have it right when they say they want leaders to take actions that will support our local economy. Thank you again. And I'm happy now to hand it over to Chris Johnson, President and CEO at AWB, and then Joe Fain, who will help close us out. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. It's clear Seattle voters are concerned about the economy, and so are statewide employers. We just completed our quarterly survey last week, and the recession fear has grown considerably just in the last few months. In fact, 44% of Washington businesses expect Washington's economy to be in a recession within the next year. That's up from 17% back in December of last year. And it's also clear that tariffs, as Rachel mentioned, are already having an impact, a big impact on employers in the state of Washington. In fact, 75% said they are concerned that tariffs will have a negative impact on their business, and 48% said they already have. And of those, nearly 45% said the tariffs have raised the cost of business inputs as well. So these numbers, they really should be a flashing red light to lawmakers in Olympia as they talk about taxes. Washington's employers are bracing for impacts from tariffs, and they're concerned about the growing increase of a recession and what that means to their business. So this is not a time to adopt some of the biggest tax increases in our state's history. Instead, we need to preserve and grow the economy, including important sectors like the innovation and technology sector, where we just heard from two great leaders in. We need to stop making it harder and start making it easier to start, grow, and keep up company in the state of Washington. So with that, let me turn it over to my friend Joe Fain, President and CEO of the Bellevue Chamber.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. And thanks, Raji, and everyone else for being on the call today. Things are happening fast in Olympia right now, and we've seen some major tax increases that just barely squeaked by in the last 12 hours, a late night vote last night. And there's not a lot of information that's being shared publicly or even with many of the members who are voting on things about just how big the tax package is going to be at the end of the day. And the fact that we're just a few days away from the end of the session, just a few hours away from more of these taxes being passed off the floor of each chamber, it's troubling to be sitting back and for businesses to not know the tsunami that's coming at them at the state level, at the municipal level, and certainly at the federal level, as you've heard from so many of the speakers today. I think it's important to realize that Washington's a tough place to start a business. It has the highest first-year business failure rate in the nation. Over 40% of businesses close within their first 12 months. It has the highest five-year failure rate. Over 50% of businesses don't survive. It has the highest 10-year failure rate, with 76% of businesses that start in the state of Washington going out of business in their first decade. These numbers are significantly worse than even some of the states that we might think of as being high regulation, high tax states like California. Washington is chief among them. But Washington is also moving in the wrong direction with its innovation and startup economy. It has dropped 10 spots, the largest decline of any of the top 40 global cities for innovation in the 2024 Global Startup Ecosystem Report. And we know from the polling done by Rachel in the Seattle Chamber, as well as the survey work done by the Association of Washington Businesses, that people are scared. People are scared about their personal finances. Businesses are making really tough choices about not, how quickly can they expand, but how can they get back to basics and weather the storm that's coming? And that storm is coming from a lot of different angles right now. And what's happening in Olympia is in some cases chief among them. So, we're coming down to the end of the session. We still don't know what the future holds in the next few days. We appreciate those legislators who have held the line and have tried to keep the box of new revenue as small as possible, especially in light of the fact that the state has 6% more revenue this year than it did last year. And we appreciate the efforts of the governor for trying to be trying to provide a little bit of tempered reaction to the ambitions of some of the legislators that are looking to really jack up taxes across the board. So, but what's coming up, what's headed to the finish line, is unacceptable from the standpoint of the business community. And it's important that as there are ongoing negotiations and as things hit the finish line, that it's very clear that our organizations and the broader business community stand united, that what's happened this session in Olympia will have long-term long-term implications for our economy, and also will have short-term disastrous implications for our economy, and this is a tough time to weather that storm. So with that, I will pass it back to Jillian.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel, Chris, and Joe. Now is the time for additional Q&A. So if you would like to ask our speakers a question, again, go ahead and put your name and media outlet in the chat, and I'll call on you when it is your turn. And I did receive this question from Hannah Kim over at Fox 13. Bill 2081 has passed in the House, which will increase the B&O tax on many companies. The state believes it can generate $5 billion. What do business owners feel about this, and how do you see it impacting business, if at all?
Chris or Steve, do you want to jump in?
I can take that one. Unfortunately, I only have one screen. We've just completed a pretty thorough Excel spreadsheet based on what passed last night. And just looking at it briefly, if you look at, let's see, pick a year, say 2027, the percentage increase, Here's a category 106%, 106%, 112%, 172%, 106%, 313%, 364.9%, 437.2%, 181.8%, 718.2%, 613.0%. These are massive tax increases that they passed last night in the House. The notion that these aren't going to affect everyday citizens is absurd. Bottom line, these taxes are going to drive up prices on groceries, gas, and everyday essentials like clothing and healthcare, and even on services like childcare and assisted living. These are going to especially hurt senior citizens and fixed income residents already struggling with inflation. Washington families are already paying $13,000 more per household each year than they did in 2021 just to get by. These are extraordinarily damaging proposals, and the impacts will be felt by everyday people all across the state.
I agree, Steve. And I will just emphasize again some of what we've talked about, which is, I don't believe businesses make decisions on a single thing. They are constantly assessing the environment in which they are operating, their business models, and determining if they can be successful. And legislators can and should legislate, but they can't be the final arbiters of what happens because employers have choices that are at their discretion to make. They can choose to locate, grow, or stay here, to keep employees in certain locations or to move them, to work remotely or in office, to create jobs or eliminate them, to raise prices, to cut services, to change their business model. So I think you necessarily will see businesses making decisions based on these significant changes that Steve just outlined.
The notion they're going to get a 600% tax increase from the state and not factor that into your economic plans is, of course, on its face, absurd, as is the notion that we're going to increase affordability by making everything more expensive. None of this makes a lot of sense from an economic perspective.
Chris, were you going to add something?
Sorry, I stole your line, Chris. Sorry.
I know we are all stealing Chris's line.
I think if I go back to Joe's stats about the vibrancy or the challenge of vibrancy of running a business in the state, those tax increases you just mentioned, Steve, are not going to help us create more companies, grow more jobs, and keep those businesses here. We literally have two trains on a collision course with our economy right now. That's what we're facing.
And we're seeing the results of what's happening already in Seattle.
My point is, these, in an already inflationary environment, these are going to drive up prices for every citizen of this state in substantial ways, on top of the inflationary effects of the tariffs.
Okay, thank you. Last call for any media questions in the chat. I'll give us one more moment and then I'll close this out. Okay, seeing none. Thank you again to each of you for joining us. I look forward to your follow-up questions in my email inbox, and I'll go ahead and drop my email in the chat one more time. And when you are ready, you are welcome to disconnect and have a wonderful day. And shout out again. Thanks, Raji. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.